Welcome to another episode of Cannabis Quarterly. We're sitting with Alex Chompff, CEO and founder, investor, entrepreneur, and we're going to be speaking about one of his businesses called NatureTrak. Thanks for joining us, Alex. How you doing?
Good, Brett. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you. Appreciate it. I know we're all excited to hear about NatureTrak and your wisdom from the Sacramento region. Inform us, what's NatureTrak? What is it? How did it come about? Kind of give us a 50,000 foot square view of NatureTrak.
Oh, well, let's see. NatureTrak is a company that I co-founded in 2017. And we had originally set out to provide track and trace operations for operators in the, at that time, newly legal adult use cannabis market in California. And that went pretty well. We developed a platform that got quite a bit of traction and really helped operators to operate within the law and to fulfill the regulatory requirements that were part of being an adult use operator in California at that time. What we found was that the market was getting fairly crowded. And so we segued into providing risk management for banks and credit unions that wanted to have one-to-one relationships with cannabis-related businesses. And that actually turned out to be a really good move for us. Over the course of the next couple of years, we facilitated about $2 billion in risk-managed transactions, including over $750 million that came off the streets in cash and went into the banking institution, and maybe another billion and change in miscellaneous transactions, everything from rent to payroll. What does it take to run a cannabis related business? And just lately, we've actually segued again into launching the first bank or banking service. You could call it a neobank. Sometimes they call them a de novo bank. But it's a new kind of bank that's really focused on providing cannabis operators with everything that they need to succeed, and to do so in a cooperative way. So we're excited about the opportunity to be the next generation, or I guess you could even say the first generation of cannabis dedicated banking operations, not just in California, but nationwide.
That's awesome. So you're operating nationwide. Is there any locations that you're more servicing? I know you're located in Sacramento. Is that where you're focused now, or are you starting to already expand across the states?
Well, NatureTrak has been supporting multi-state operators for a number of years now. And obviously we only operate where cannabis is legal at the state level. And we can support both medical use as well as the more permissive adult use. And what we really do is we really help cannabis operators to not only operate within their state frameworks, but operate in such a way as to stay well within the bounds of the federal guidance that's been issued. Because we know that it's important for operators to have comfort and security. They're operating well within the bounds of the law, because as this market matures, we see an opportunity for greater and greater economic benefit, both at the state and federal level, because this is a very big industry and it supports a lot of people. It's very important, not just to California's economy, but to the national economy.
I think so too. I think cannabis and hemp is, in my opinion, the last physical industry that can be industrialized. Like tech and AI is apps, and what I mean by tangible is like a crop or something like a product you can actually have ancillary businesses from. It's fascinating and I'm excited about it. You mentioned track and trace. Can you explain for people that haven't heard what track and trace is, kind of what that means?
Oh, sure. And before I do that, let me just reflect back to you for a moment that you're absolutely correct. Cannabis is a large and actually mature industry. It's been a mature industry for a number of years, as anybody who's operated in the before time knows. Cannabis is actually one of the most valuable commodities that we produce in California, and not just in California, but other states as well. And I agree with you that it's one of the most important emerging economies inside of a developed economy like the one we have here in the United States. So that's wonderful to see and to understand, because it really provides a lot of opportunity for all of us to benefit in a reasonable and sensible way from advancing regulation. And, you know, speaking of regulation, when adult use cannabis became permissible in California, it was coming out of an earlier initiative, which was that of medical marijuana or medical cannabis. And so this is typically the progression that you see as states move toward legalization. Is initially they legalize this commodity for medical use. And medical use really has its roots in the biopharmaceutical industry. And it's probably worth mentioning that at various times in my past, I've been a technology director for a biopharmaceutical operation. And the way biopharmaceuticals work is it's very, very important to understand when you produce a product for end user consumption in a medical context. It's very important to understand how that product came to be. What were the original ingredients in that product? You know, what raw ingredients were actually used to produce a product that a consumer is now going to take into their body for medical benefit, right? This is, you know, we have an FDA for a reason. And one of the things that an FDA requires is the ability to track and trace the components that are located within a medical product. And so knowing that cannabis originally tends to have its roots in medical context, it's then easy to understand that as it became available for adult use, that medical context was carried forward. And so, for example, in California and in many other states, it's a requirement at the point of sale, at the point of consumption, for a consumer to be able to have a sense of security about the sourcing and treatment of the products that they're consuming. And so in California, that means that at each step of the manufacturing process, at each step of the grow process, it's important to be able to track the product from its, you know, original seed or cutting through its harvesting phase and into its distribution phase. And sometimes between harvesting and distribution, you know, harvesting and distribution is typically like a flower kind of activity, but many times flowers are actually reconstituted into other products, whether they're edibles or topicals or you know, inhaled products like vape style products. And it's important for a consumer to be able to know that the raw ingredients, whether it's the flower or throughout the manufacturing process, that, you know, no toxins have been introduced into that final product, that the product tests for efficacy, that it has the appropriate chemical composition to be able to yield the effects that are expected from this commodity. And, you know, some simple sort of common sense things like there's no mold, right? There's no pesticides. There are no things in this product that are going to hurt the consumer. All of these activities are part of what we generically call track and trace. And so, you know, NatureTrak started off as a track and trace platform for operators. And that really gave us a very deep understanding of how the business of cannabis operates. And it even more specifically gave us insight into two activities that are called inversion and diversion. And inversion and diversion refer to these two things that can happen when you deal with an industry like cannabis. Inversion refers to legacy funds that were accumulated before cannabis became legal. Those legacy funds are very often held in cash form, and they're very difficult for people who are operating in the before time to use legally And so there's a tendency then to try to pour those funds into the what you call the legal money supply, right? The federally recognized, appropriately managed money supply. That activity is called inversion. There's a separate but related activity called diversion, where products that are being grown and manufactured can be shipped out the side door and sold in a market where, let's say the product isn't legal and therefore command a higher price. So there's a tendency to both invert funds and divert product.
Mm-hmm.
And NatureTrak developed a specific set of algorithms and control processes to both detect and deter inversion and diversion. And that became the basis for our risk management platform for the banking industry. And the banking industry here includes also, credit unions that want to have a direct relationship with cannabis operators, that want to be able to take in those funds for liquidity at the financial institution, as well as provide a wide variety of merchant services that are necessary for the safe conduct and operation and growth of any business, including a cannabis business.
Right. So that's basically like a chain of custody, literally a chain of custody, to make sure. I can attest to everything you just said, having worked in a testing lab before and then having worked in a dispensary. It's things that you observe like that before you know what goes into the process. Like working at a testing lab, you just go, oh, I'm sure they test just for potency and, what cannabinoids are in there. And yeah, they do all that testing. But the fact that now we know that there's no mold or pesticides or residual solvents, and who grew the seed, what you're referring to is tracking from who grew the seed all the way to who smoked or consumed the final product, truly track and trace, or seed to sale, seed to smoke, however you want to, spin it and say it. That's fascinating. And the testing lab angle is really interesting because people don't, like in the not black market, but the states where it's not legal yet, obviously prices are cheaper and you go, buy something off the street or whatever, and you don't have to pay the taxes. But everybody I've spoken to has said, listen, I'll pay an extra $5, $10 to know that it's clean, know where I got it, everything you just said.
Yeah. I think there are a number of topics that are interesting here in this field, right? One is efficacy, without a doubt. Efficacy matters, right? Typically people are consuming this commodity for efficacious reasons. They want to experience a particular effect, and they want that effect to be within boundaries that they understand and that are safe. Okay, so efficacy is definitely part of it. I think the other or another part of it that's important is supporting the actual commercial activity in a regulatorily appropriate way allows the community to come together behind it, right? Nobody wants illegal activities in their neighborhood. And even though it may cost a little bit more, and right now, as we're working through these regulatory frameworks, it does cost a little bit more to consume this product legally. It not only gives comfort to the community and comfort to the consumer, it also provides an important tax base. And that tax base not only supports this community, but supports the larger needs of the community, everything from policing to schools and roads. These are all things that we can get behind as members of our community. And I think it's important to give operators who want to be in a legitimate frame the space and comfort to operate safely and profitably.
You made a great point about the legacy people operating mostly on cash, obviously, because any federal bank can't do, it's still federally Schedule I substance. So no federal bank is really going to take the risk in touching cannabis businesses until they pass more legislation, which I'll ask you about in a second. But you made a point about local communities that's very interesting. When in California, when it went from medicinal to recreational, I found it interesting that like Inglewood, I think it was Inglewood or Compton, one of the two opted out about having dispensaries in their local municipalities because of that very reason. It's only cash operating businesses. And so I think they had the foresight to say, hey, listen, and they left themselves a clause that says they could change it in the foreseeable future once banking passes. But that was a signal saying, listen, we don't want to bring any additional potential crime into the community. We want to operate from a legal basis, and we will as soon as that's an option. So I found that very fascinating.
Yeah.
Which I get.
Yeah. Well,
which,
go
ahead.
You're raising a really interesting point. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important to understand that this is specifically the area that NatureTrak operates in, is the safe handling and disposition of this cash, right? Over $750 million has been taken into dispensaries and cannabis related businesses and deposited subsequently into credit unions and banks that are state chartered but federally regulated. And having stood to several federal examinations as well as state examinations, we're very pleased and proud to say that not only have we had no material deficiencies found in our processes, but we actually find that regulators at both the state and federal level not only recommend our product to banks and credit unions, but consult with NatureTrak for guidance on how to safely conduct these operations, as well as avoid both inversion and diversion, of which we spoke earlier.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. I've been exposed to point of sale softwares and things like that, and always thought like, man, why isn't anybody doing this on the banking? And you guys are, and you were way ahead of it before I even had the idea, which is really, I think, promising for the cannabis industry. That for me, I was really excited to talk to you about cannabis and tech, because in my opinion, I think the combination of cannabis and tech the potential is so unlimited, for the ability, like what you were saying, for example, somebody wants a specific effect here in the foreseeable future, who knows how far away, you'll be able to grow something literally, metrically, specifically for that feeling, or for this bone, or for, you isolate a certain cannabinoid and it helps your migraine go away like that, or your elbow, or something like that. But regarding the banking, and obviously a lot of people have obstacles. We mentioned banking a second ago. There's a bill going around, the Safe Banking Act, which I'm sure you're well aware of. How would that help the cannabis community start banking and pouring? Because it seems like a no-brainer to me, where, hey, look, from an overview, our economy is missing cash, and we have this industry over here that has a bunch of cash. Seems like it would be a natural 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And actually, as we record this, the United States is about 8 weeks into what could be characterized as a regional banking crisis. And that regional banking crisis is generally understood to be a lack of liquidity. And liquidity here is the technical term for cash deposited in banks to support their operations. And here you have this industry that is a multi-billion-dollar industry throughout the nation that would be not only excited, but eager to provide that liquidity to banks. And many, many banks, both at the regional and national level, are very reluctant to get involved with this industry because, as you mentioned, cannabis is considered to be an illegal product or an illegal commodity at the federal level. And so there's a level of risk that's associated with these transactions that doesn't necessarily have to be there. And that perception of risk makes it very difficult for cannabis operators in any state in the union to have commercial banking activities, and commercial banking activities are an important part of running your business in a legitimate way. It's important to be able to take the cash that you've received throughout the day and deposit it someplace safely so that you don't become a victim of crime, so that that cash isn't lost. It's important to be able to access merchant services like credit card processing, payroll processing, commercial lending, right? These are all activities that every legitimate business needs and should have
Small business
access to.
loans.
Yeah, 100%. So as you've mentioned, there have been a number of initiatives that have taken different forms over the years at the federal level to try to normalize the banking schema across the 50 states. Because one of the great things about the United States of America is that it's conceived of as 50 experimental areas, 50 ways, 50 states in which we can all try our own thing. And as we learn that things work or don't work, those other states can take up the lessons learned, and eventually at a federal level, we can undertake change that enables services and business support across the nation. And right now, we haven't got that federalization schema all the way put together. As that particular process matures and advances, we're going to find that this already mature economy, because anybody who's been in the cannabis economy for any length of time understands that it's been mature for decades. Okay, that instead of paying taxes where cannabis is considered to be illegal, instead of supporting your schools, instead of supporting your community, instead of building roads with the taxes that are being extracted from the production and sale of this commodity, you're paying for security, and that security is often going to criminal organizations, was provided by criminal organizations, to the detriment not only of the communities in which these transactions are occurring, but to the detriment of both the state and the nation, and frankly, the detriment of the nations that are, oftentimes the source for what is then considered to be an illegal commodity. So there's an opportunity here at the federal level to recognize that that normalization, that acceptance has already largely occurred throughout the United States, and to provide a regulatory schema that allows businesses to operate legitimately throughout the nation, that allows banks to bank those businesses legitimately throughout the nation, and hopefully provides the same, let's say, tax benefits and protections to cannabis operators and cannabis related businesses as are provided to any other legitimate business in the United States today.
What you just said is a huge complaint, not just from everybody in the industry, but myself as well, as far as, we just want to be treated just like any other industry. Cannabis can't advertise at all, like on billboards, but yet alcohol, there's one every 20 yards. And that's what a lot of people are calling for is, listen, we like you said, we want to give you our liquidity, we want to give you our cash and our business, but you're not letting us for whatever reason. With NatureTrak, what would you say the majority of your businesses, or clients I should say, are in the cannabis space? Are they retailers? Are they growers? Who do you see using NatureTrak the most?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I don't have the exact numbers right in front of me, but I am going to say that the banks and credit unions that we have been supporting for a number of years now, they go all the way from seed through sale, all the way from seed through consumption. So you'll find that there are cultivators, you'll find that there are manufacturers, that there are distributors, that there are dispensaries, that there are delivery services. All of these services can and have taken advantage of our risk management platform for banks and credit unions. And now that we're rolling out this new initiative, and this new initiative is called Cooperative Financial Services. You can find it at cooperativefs.com. And Cooperative Financial Services will be catering to the entire industry. And, you know, even beyond actual operators and distributors and cultivators, will be taking care of the employees of those companies. Because one of the things that is pernicious and not really well understood is that if you're an employee of a cannabis related business, you can find yourself debanked. You can find yourself tossed out of a bank because you're accepting, even though you live in California, even though you work in California, even though you operate as a bud tender, let's say, at a dispensary that's operating well within the bounds of the law, you can find that your access to banking on a personal level is suddenly cut off because of the risk management policies of banks that have not yet implemented a system like the one that we offer. And that can be devastating for an individual. You know, you can have a situation where your credit cards and your mortgage and your car loan and, you know, your savings and checkings account are all impacted, even though you are a W-2 employee of a perfectly legitimate business in a state where cannabis is legal. So we see at Cooperative Financial Services not only the need to take care of the industry, but the need to take care of the people within the industry. And we think that this is a really fantastic opportunity to provide services that are going to benefit businesses, individuals, and communities.
And you made a great point again, where I worked at a dispensary. I won't say which one for safety reasons, but every time we got our paycheck, they still took out taxes and all that stuff, but they handed us, it was just cash. So whatever our paycheck was had our hours and breakdown like we usually do, but the paper was just folded up around our cash because they couldn't run payroll. That also affects health insurance or dental insurance policies that I'm sure NatureTrak kind of dives into. Do you guys kind of get in that realm at all, or is that different?
Well, what we see is a situation where the services that we provide, which is, you know, again, to be clear, the ability for cannabis operators and employees to, I should say cannabis related businesses, what we call CRBs, and their employees to have a legitimate one-to-one banking relationship, then supports all of these ancillary services that you've mentioned, right? Everything from commercial lending to personal lending to you know, credit card processing, payroll, insurance, all the things that you would hope to see in any legitimate field of business.
As an investor and entrepreneur and business owner, where do you see the cannabis industry stacking up compared to other sectors and other industries coming forward in the next, you know, decade or two? As far as opportunity for growth, what advice would you give to kind of people that are interested in the cannabis industry in the future?
That's a really good question. It kind of depends on where you stand. You know, like what's your vantage point, right? How are you viewing this? Are you an individual who wants to, let's say, come up with a particular brand and, you know, a market to a particular subsection of this community? Are you interested in getting into the logistics part, transportation? Are you interested in getting into testing? Are you interested in getting into cultivation, manufacturing? There are many aspects to this business because, again, as we've discussed, this is a mature industry, has been a mature industry for long since before it became legal for adult use. And so I think that what you're really seeing is a kind of coming out of the shadows. You're seeing the opportunity, and we saw this in California, particularly early on, 2017 and 2018. A lot of operators proliferated in this newly available space. And that's typically what happens anytime you have a kind of new industry. and you could consider the legal cannabis industry to be new, even though the larger cannabis industry is more mature. And so what you saw was this kind of, blooming of 1,000 flowers. And that's typically what happens anytime you have an emerging industry like this, and it's continuing to happen. Now, for states that have been in, that have had adult use cannabis or medical cannabis, legally defined for longer periods, we're now going through what's considered to be a consolidation phase. And that's very natural for any business. You can compare it to the dot-com boom, for example. You can say, okay, there was a period when the internet was new and novel. And, for those of us who are old enough to remember, the internet actually existed before, web browsers did, before the World Wide Web. But when web browsers came out and people could have a graphical interface for this thing called the internet, then we had this blooming of 1,000 flowers. And oftentimes that's referred to as the dot-com boom. And, during this blooming of 1,000 flowers, not every business is going to survive. Not every business is well conceived. Not every business is well planned. Not every business is well managed. And cannabis is no different from any other business in that it needs to have a solid vision and needs to have a clear understanding of its market and good leadership and, a certain amount of luck in order to survive and prosper. And what's happened over the years here in California is that those companies which have survived and prospered are now going through and consolidating with the companies that, didn't have the necessary components for long-term viability. That same wave is occurring throughout the nation, and it's at different stages depending on how long or how far away from legality each one of these states is. As we go to a national schema for normalized regulation, I think we'll see that phenomenon occur again. And so what I would say to an operator or an entrepreneur who wants to get into the business is understand where that business cycle is in your own locality. If you're in a place where cannabis has been legal for several years, you're probably closer to the consolidation phase than you are to germination. If you're at a place where cannabis has recently become legal, like I believe it's recently become legal in New York, you're probably going to see that germination phase occurring, that blooming of those flowers. But in 2 or 3 or 4 years, the business operators who are using the principles of good business operation, who are practicing good governance, who are staying on top of their financials, who've got a clear definition of their market and an ability to acquire and maintain market share, they're going to be in a position to absorb companies that might have good ideas, but maybe didn't have quite the execution that was needed for long-term viability. So what I would do as an entrepreneur first is I would look at where I am. And from a regional perspective, I would ask, where are we in the maturity cycle? If I was a particularly small entrepreneur who wasn't, let's say, very well resourced, I would try to be in a place where the legalization had occurred more recently. If I was a more capitalized individual, or I was, belonged to, let's say, a consortium of individuals who were interested in consolidating and commanding a particular part of the market, then I would go to a place where it had been legal for longer, and I would look for those opportunities for mergers and acquisitions.
That's great strategic business advice for anybody listening. That's as good as it gets. I saw firsthand kind of what you're talking about when I was working at a testing lab. It was a bunch of oil people from Texas, ironically, and they wanted to get in the testing game because they knew that there was only a couple testing labs in California, and so they wanted to get into it. And I realized, some of our competitors, they had 10-year relationships with people that they were, license sharing with. They're vertically integrated with partnerships and brand establishments, and they were legacy developed companies with relationships. And I said to him, I was like, you should just go back to Texas because that's about to be legalized there, or it's got a potential future, or go to Michigan or Illinois or someplace where it's not. It was interesting, just my observations were really in line with what you said. And I wanted to circle back when you were talking about the internet. I read, and maybe you can confirm this, the first sale, what was the first purchase on the actual internet? I don't know if do you know?
That's a really good question. No, I don't think I do know.
It was weed.
Really? Really?
Yep.
That's really interesting.
The first
Really
online sale, first online transaction was cannabis.
No,
And
I
so
didn't know that.
it's kind of poetic, in a writer's, novel. It's really kind of, you can't really add that element. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But the what you're talking about with the mergers and acquisitions, it's in such a phase right now, like you said, where it's state compartmentalized. But from yourself, who's been in other industries that are past, well past this phase, it seems like it's going to go the route of like alcohol, where you've got eventually you have a couple national brands and whatever, the national brands that everybody, the Miller Lights, the Bud Lights, all that kind of stuff. And then you'll eventually get regional grows and brews and that kind of thing. And I just see it going a similar path of the alcohol industry. And I know a lot of the alcohol commissioners in states, mostly a lot of red leaning states, want to kind of, roll that under their guidance. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out locally, regionally, and nationally.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point, to use alcohol as a parallel, right? And if you think about the alcohol industry post-prohibition, it wasn't as though the relatively few national level players came onto the scene in the first 10 or 15 or even 20 years. They didn't. Those national level players developed over a century, because that's about how long it's been since prohibition ended. And interestingly, in that context, we actually find that over the last, let me say, 10 to 20 years, there's been a re-proliferation of craft brewers, right? Craft distilleries. So you could think about the car industry. Car industry went through a similar kind of transformation, right? Early part of the 20th century, there were, I don't know, hundreds, maybe 1,000 or more car makers. Mm-hmm. That eventually became a few big car makers in the United States. And that industry then found itself transplanted around the world. And now we're coming back into, I think, an age of innovation, where we're finding that there are car companies being launched today in the electrical vehicle market, because that particular innovation and the change in the regulatory incentives has allowed that proliferation to begin again. So I think that while there will eventually be a roll-up of the cannabis industry into a few large players at the national level, I think that particular time is well into the future. There's plenty of opportunity between here and there for innovators and entrepreneurs to get involved and find their space within that larger milieu.
That's a great way to summarize it. And I would say to anybody that's interested in the cannabis or hemp space, look at your local laws and guidances and businesses and see where you are in those stages. And if you want to get into it, connect with the local community. And you mentioned something about time, and I know we've been on here, half hour, 45 minutes. And I don't want to take too much more of your time. You've had some amazing insights for us and everybody watching. So really thank you and appreciate it. And is there anything else that maybe I forgot to mention that you'd like to add on, and also let people know where they can find you if they have questions, if they want to contact you regarding businesses or NatureTrak and things like that?
Sure. Well, a couple of thoughts. From a contact information perspective, you can find NatureTrak online at naturetrak.com. You can find our latest incarnation is Cooperative Financial Services at cooperativefs.com. If you need to get a hold of me, I'm actually the executive director of Evolution Accelerator and the managing partner of Evolution Ventures. And we're pretty easy to Google. You can just Google Evolution Accelerator and you can find us. And, in my, larger day job as an investor and an operator in the fintech space and in the startup world in general, particularly with an eye toward early ventures, seed stage ventures, I would encourage every listener of this podcast who's an entrepreneur to go ahead and take some risks. Go ahead and get out there and give it a shot. There's really no substitute for putting on your tennis shoes and taking a few laps around the track. You can overthink anything. And really the most important learning comes from doing. And for those of you that may be looking for funding or trying to do fundraising in the world out there, I have some advice that I try to give to any fundraising company. And that is that it can feel when you're fundraising like you're in the hunt for gold, like you're panning for gold. And panning for gold can be a long, hard, bold process. And what you may not realize as an entrepreneur is that you are actually the gold in the gold mine. This entire ecosystem exists to find you and support you as an entrepreneur. So sometimes when you're out there and the nights are long and dawn seems a little ways away, remember that you're actually the gold in the gold mine. You're what all of us are looking for, and stick to it, and persist in your vision. Go ahead and take that risk. Go ahead and put yourself out there and take some chances. It's worth it to be part of anything that's new, and it's required to if you're going to create something out of nothing, you're going to have to take some risks. You're going to have to communicate. You're going to have to get out there and give it a go. So go on out and give it a go, and you'll surprise yourself with the success that you're going to enjoy as an entrepreneur in America.
Thank you for that inspirational strategy, advice, everything. I second everything you just said, because it is a great analogy. If you are the gold, then this is the green rush, and you are the plant that's going to grow with this green rush. And it is a green rush, green industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it. That combined with the exponential age of tech that we're in, the opportunities are going to be limitless. Especially, I'd love to talk to you again about, in the future, about potential of carbon capture and technology and clean energy with cannabis and all that. And but that's a longer conversation for another day. So Alex Chompff, I appreciate the time very much. And I will pin a link for everybody in the description where you can find all the data and information that Alex just shared. And thank you very much for joining us. And I appreciate your time and wisdom.
Well, Brett, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's an honor to share with your audience, and go on out there and continue to innovate and continue to create. We live in a great country, and there's opportunity aplenty. So thanks again, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having yourself on the podcast with me. I appreciate it. Thank you for making the time, and we'll talk to Alex again soon. Have a great weekend.
You too.